At the end of April, we had Warhammer Fest 2023, and on this Sunday there was a Warcry tournament. Unfortunately, I could only attend this Saturday, so I didn't get to witness the Warcry tournament in action. However, I was keen to check out the results and take a closer look at the 55 warbands that participated in the event. In this video, I will provide a brief overview of each of the warbands, but do note that I did transcribe the list myself, so any errors should be attributed to me rather than the players. Out of the 55 players, there were 21 Chaos, 16 Order, 10 Death, and 8 Destruction warbands. The event comprised a total of 4 games, allowing for a maximum of 4 undefeated players at the end, and resulting in 108 games in total. The chart below shows 55 players, colour-coded by Grand Alliance, with the last place on the left and the first place on the right. It's important to note that drawing any major conclusions based on results of a single event should be avoided. However, combining this information with other events can lead to a more informed conclusion. To better understand this event, let's go over each of the 4 rounds and their objectives. Round 1 was Power Struggle, an objective-based mission with 4 objectives. You score points equal to the battle round for each objective you control at the end of a round, with later rounds being worth more points than the earlier ones. The secondary objective was an Early Grave, which rewarded bonus victory points for killing the enemy leader. For deployment, the shield started turn 1. Round 2 was Supremacy, with 6 objectives. Rather than scoring for each objective, you got 2 points at the end of each round for holding 2 objectives, 3 objectives, or holding more objectives than your opponent. The random secondary objective was Strong Arm the Competition, which added an extra objective in the centre of the battlefield, contested by total wounds. For deployment, Dagger started turn 1. Round 3 was Spoils of War, with 4 objectives. You gain 1 point at the end of each round for controlling an objective, but you also had the option to destroy an objective as a fighter action and gain 2 victory points. The secondary objective was Stolen Wares, which added 3 treasure tokens, each giving 2 victory points at the end of the game. This round, Hammer started on turn 1. The last round was Tides of Battle, another objective-based mission. Each turn, the player who doesn't have the initiative picks one of the 6 objectives to be the primary objective, and the rest become secondary. Controlling the primary objective gives you 2 victory points, while controlling any of the secondary objectives gives you 1 each. The secondary objective was Predator and Prey, where each player picks a fighter at the start of each turn, and they get 2 victory points at the end of that turn if the fighter was killed, was at an objective, or had treasure. So, all 4 rounds were objective based, so having lots of cheap models to control the board was definitely advantageous in this. However, the first game, Power Struggle, rewarded more points in later turns, allowing warbands to cut their way through opponents. Since you pick your deployments before knowing the mission, it's essentially a crapshoot. For this event, Shield and Hammer started once, with Dagger starting twice, giving an advantage to any warband that placed their top fighters in a Dagger group. Dementia shared some shots of the event's nearly 30 tables on the Warcry Discord, and they look impressive. It's possible that many of the terrain pieces were straight from the cards, which is great. When assessing the terrain, there are 2 main factors to consider. First, is there enough space for monsters? Despite the points increase, they are formidable fighters. Secondly, are the areas inaccessible to mounted fighters? Some fighters have the mounted trait, and while it's not a problem on certain boards, objectives or treasure on platform can be out of reach. Fortunately, all missions for this event specified that objectives should be placed on the battlefield floor, so mounted fighters wouldn't be too disadvantaged. Most tables had some interesting platforms though, which could be used strategically to keep fighters safe from mounted threats. Okay, let's move on. First up, we have Order. There were 60 warbands in total, 3 Cities of Sigmar, 3 Thunderstrike Stormcast, 2 Sylvaneth, 2 Kharadron Overlords, 2 Hunters of Huanchi, and 1 each of Daughters of Cain, Luminate Realm Lords, Warrior Stormcast, and Seraphon. We start with the Rockcliffe and Cities of Sigmar. This looks like a super fun list. It's nice and simple with a mounted Preceptor and 10 free guild fighters to back him up, 5 with swords and shields and 5 with rifles. This list placed 53rd. The first game was a draw, which got 3 points, and then each game after that was a loss, which is 1 point. While it may not have been winning any medals, this is my favourite kind of list, as it feels really flavourful, and I've no doubt it looks great on the table. Next we have Alexia Exposita with Sylvaneth. The 2 Shadestalkers have access to the double Shrieking Terror, which is a net-like effect. Everyone else in the list can attack at range, so in theory this list can lock down 2 of the scariest enemies and then attack outside their threat range. The Kurnoth Hunters are beefy, while the Spite Rider Lancer is super fast to get where you need. I think this list could have done really well if the missions were different. Here we have Michelle Massana playing Thunderstrike Stormcast. This type of list is a classic and has done well in other events. The 5 Annihilators can do a lot of damage and are incredibly hard to kill. Their only weakness is that they're slow. That's where Kaltia and the Old Guard come in. Kaltia has a triple to give fighters equal to half the value of the dice a bonus move. The Old Guard no doubt is from the Tempest Eye faction, with the Swift as a Wind triple, which will add half the ability value to the movement of nearby friendly fighters. Taste New Order has something similar. Instead of the Annihilators, it's 5 Vindicators. So you lose a bit of damage, but you gain reach and movement. So hopefully you get to where you're going fast, and can use the reach to force your opponent to waste an action to get close. Sam Olaf has a little bit more variety here. The Lord Imperatant has similar access abilities as Kaltia, but is a little chunkier with a range ability. The Praetor has an ability to heal the Lord Imperatant, which is nice. The Knight Arcanum doesn't have the movement ability of the Imperatant, but does have a nice range attack as a double. Next we have Daughters of Cain list by John Dunleavy, although we do see the Lord Imperatant still. The Bloodwrack Medusa is one of those awesome problem solvers. Lots of damage and very fast at 7 movement. She also has a net triple and a reach of 2, so she can move up and try to kill something, and if it doesn't die, lock it down, which is very, very nice. Leonardo Cogdigi has another Cities of Sigmar list. I'm not sure what city it is, so I've assumed it's from the Tempest Eye, which is the most popular. Like the earlier one, this does feel very flavorful. A battle mage leading the warband, 2 knights, and some great swords and gunners. I'm a big fan of the battle mage. He's cheap, has access to Swift as the Wind, and has a fun quad that can target any visible fighter no matter the range and do a chunk of damage. Probably not something you'll use often, but it could win a game once in a blue moon. Scott Taylor with Lumineth Realm Lords. The Lumineth army box made for a fantastic warband. The Wardens in particular are a bargain at 65 points. All of this warband has reach, which is notable, letting them attack but still have a good chance of surviving, despite their relatively low health. Matthias Brusselier's with Strongcast, but this time it's the Warrior Chamber. Only 6 fighters in total, but with a minimum of 20 wounds and 5 toughness. That's going to take some time to get through. At a quick glance, I can't see any abilities of particular note, but with solid stat lines like that, you can get a lot of work done with just the basics. Next up, Hannah Joyce with Sylvaneth. The Kernot Hunters are some of my favourites. Lots of damage and seemingly impossible to kill. The 2 Spite Revenants have Shrieking Terror, that gives them a net ability. The Godsmith Archer and the Arch Revenant are fast flyers, while the Tree Revenant is a solid cheap extra body. As we go up through the brackets, we're starting to see more and more bodies on the table. Here, Trolls Knack Nielsen has 9 Caradron Overlords and 2 Gorgai. The Arcanauts are a really solid base. The Captain is one of the cheaper leaders at 90, while the Privateers are a bargain at 50 each. The addition of the Gorgai gives some real punch. They're fast with 7 movements and some fantastic damage. They can focus on the killing while the Arcanauts focus on objectives and, control the occasional pistol shot to help. This is Farron Hommett's Hunters of Huanchi, relatively new warband. This looks very close to a single box, but one of those skinks has been changed to a Huanchi's Claw, which was a great call. I'd say this tournament was quite interesting for its warband. With 13 bodies, they can cover a lot of objectives, but will still struggle to kill anything. Dan Hiskett has taken a similar approach to Trolls. Here we have the Warden King and 9 Ironbreakers. So basically it's an army block of 5 toughness dwarfs. Then the Kellion King, one of the top damage dealers for Order, is able to fly around the table and then kill whatever he wants. Perfect for this event. Aitan Hilmi is from Off Meta Musings. If you don't follow his channel yet, you definitely should. I've no doubt he'll have a look at this event, and actually being in the event will have maybe a little bit more insight than I do. Here we have him rocking his Hunters of Huanchi, which he's been slowly perfecting since they came out. As we saw in the list review, Huanchi's Claw is the star of that warband, and despite there only being 1 in the box, here we have 5. The leader is the Chameleon Skink Alpha, and there's 1 extra skink. Both have Moonstone clubs to give them access to the triple Herd Bolas ability, which can reduce a target's actions. Add to that Kixi Taka and Otapel from the Star Blood Underworld's warband, and the Mizzen Master for extra punch. The Mizzen Master is fast, will fly, and can do a ton of damage. It also opens up Fight for Profit, which can be a real nice damage boost for the little guys. Ian Atkins has another take on the Overlords. 9 fighters in total, 2 Admirals, 2 Grundstock Thunderers with Ether Cannons, 4 Arcanauts, and an Endrin Master with Dirigible Suit. Only the Thunderers have a rune mark of note. In this case, they can get the free Disengage for a triple. So this is mostly about numbers and stats. I figure it plays a pretty good shooting game, something the Karajan Overlords are kings of. Andrew Firth has a Seraphon list, although it's more of a Star Blood list, as 6 of the 8 fighters are from that Underworld list. Add to that the Saurus Old Blood and the Saurus Knight Alpha for some chunky damage, and you've got a pretty good winning combination. The 2 Sauruses are both heroes, so they do get the double Cold-Blooded Commander, which will give them an extra attack or move after they take out a target. This list won all 4 of its games, with the final standings decided by strength of schedule, so this list could really have gone all the way. Next up, we've got the Chaos Warbands with 21 in total. The most popular warband for the entire event was the Chaos Legionnaires, with 5 warbands in attendance. There were also 2 Iron Golems, 2 Maggotkin of Nurgle, Demon, 2 Dark Oath Savagers, and then 1 each of the Head Knights of Slaanesh Cyberites, the Claws of Karnak, Beasts of Chaos, Disciples of Tzeentch Arcanates, Skaven, Tarantulas Brood, Signs of the Flame, Rotmar Creed, Blades of Khorne Bloodbound, and the Slaves Darkness. First up, Lee Dopekin with Iron Golems. This was a single box played as is. I have this exact same list and I do enjoy playing it, especially since the updates 2.0. During the Warcry reveals at Warhammer Fest, someone did ask if there was a plan to balance bespoke warbands. Those are the small warbands made specifically for Warcry, like the Iron Golems, with the larger warbands, like the Slaves Darkness, for example. Personally, I disagree with the idea that there is an issue, but I think this here is a good example of why people might think there is one. Lee obviously was turning up just to have some fun and grabbed a single box team. Now later, we'll see a more competitive Iron Golems list, which needs multiple boxes of Iron Golems and also has 3 heroes rather than just 1. That list will do better against those larger warbands, where you don't have the option to just build out of a single box. Alright, next up, Cyberites with Chris McConville. The 2 Blissbarb Archers have an awesome triple that'll get them more dice, and if they're near the Homunculus, they get an extra strength as well. Lord of Plane has some crazy damage and a double that gives an extra move or kill after an attack. That's probably the backbone of this warband. The Slickblade is super fast at move 10, while the Twin Soul and the Painbringer are both solid mid-range fighters. Simon King has the first of the Chaos Legionnaire lists. This is a straightforward out-of-the-box build with a variety of weapons. It's no real surprise this warband was so popular. It's a fantastic box, and weirdly was one of the few warbands released as a single box, rather than first appearing in one of the bigger boxes. Here we have Raymond Ferret with Claws of Karnak. Again, I believe this is straight from one box. This warband, of course, has that really fun chaining ability, Pack Hunter, that the Blood Whelps and the Hound can use. The Meat Hook does give access to the triple Horrifying trophies, which can be used to prevent fighters within 6 inches from using abilities. I would love to know how useful that was in this event. Jessica Denny brought Nurgle Demons, as horrifying as they are adorable. 10 fighters in total, which will be good for this event. Sloppity is there to give those slow Plague Bearers a movement buff. You can't see from the picture, but that Plague Drone is on a giant fly, with a Venomous Sting double ability that prevents the target from moving or disengaging. It can also do some decent damage, but importantly has 30 wounds, so it's hard to get through. Same with the Beast of Nurgle, and this warband as a whole has a bucket load of wounds, and everything can take a double to heal up. Next we have the Dark Oath Scavengers by David Drysdale. 2 fighters were dropped to make room for the Exalted Deathbringer with Impaling Spear, which is a solid addition. If he gets a kill, he can use the triple Lord of Skulls to give +1 attack bonus to nearby friendlies for the rest of the turn. Although, I think you're probably more likely to just use his Blood for the Blood God double instead. Ed Wallace also went with Dark Oath Scavengers. No ally this time, but with a build that heavily favours shields. I'm not sure if that was a strategy or just a rule of cool pick. Personally, I love the look of a sword and board, so I definitely can relate. Bentley Hunter here with Beasts of Chaos. 10 fighters in total, using those gores to get a lot of bodies on the table. The Great Bray Shaman has that fantastic Harpoon ability, which can get you lots of value if you're able to drag the target into a killer, like that Dragon Ogre. I'm surprised there's no Doom Bull in this list, but I gotta admit, I really don't like the model, which might be the real reason. Henry Tobit brought Arcanites, a wonderful looking set of models. That blue is always so striking. 7 fighters in total, most of the team speed 5, so it should be able to get in a position fast enough. And with 15 wounds for the lowest, it should be relatively survivable. The Skyfire, Thaumaturge and Curseling all have pretty good range attacks, which should make this list pretty flexible and reactive. Our first and only Skaven warband is from Adam Biddulph. Rather than relying heavily on Rad Ogres, this list just has 1, along with 3 leaders, the Clawlord, Master Molder and Knight Leader to get a lot of work done. The Packmaster does back up that one Rat Ogre, while the 4 Clan Rats fill out numbers. It does look like the Rat Ogre is still the linchpin here. If you get him into position, then the Packmaster and Master Molder can both use doubles to get extra attacks out of him, which is pretty nice. Andy Woods brought Chaos Legionnaires. This looks like another single box with a slightly different build. I haven't been talking about it, but note that the Curiarch and the Mutander, two of the better fighters, are in the dagger for this warband. That meant that they started on the board 50% of the time. That would have been game 2 and 4 though, which was a loss and a win respectively, so obviously while it can be advantage, it's not everything. Michael Verks brought Tarantula's Brood. These came late in the first edition, and with their cheap spiders were absolutely top tier. In this edition they took a bit of a kick, so it's nice to see them here. I'm not entirely sure whether you can build these fighters out of one box. You have the bodies, I'm just not sure if you have all the weapon options. I think you do. In his recent Warcry list video, Salty Sea did point out that you can make a 4th spider with all the random spider bits from the other models. The Broodkin and Spider Swarms are super cheap, so this warband is able to run 12 fighters in total. As a bonus, if those swarms go down, you can bring them back with a triple. Kit Prakamical with Chaos Legionnaires. Here we have 2 allies, the Trueblood, who has a fantastic net ability, and the Slaughter Priest, who has a Harpoon ability. This lets the warband focus on the Horn Helms, which are one of the better options for this list, dropping Horn Shields to make room. This does mean it's Heaven Fighters only, although everything is very, very dangerous. Signs of Flame by Matt Dower. This is a straight out of the box build, so a draw, 2 wins and 1 loss is actually quite an impressive result. I'm delighted to see this warband do well as I recently finished painting up my own. Simon Holland has another Chaos Legionnaire list. This one is kind of interesting as it is a single box, but Simon has gone with an all axe build rather than mixing things up. I'm of the opinion that the Horn Helm with axe is the better choice, even if it does cost slightly more. For Horn Shields, the mace is slightly better, but you have to drop to the axe to make points to upgrade the Horn Helms. Since the Horn Shields are mostly bodies that score objectives, having the Horn Helms a little bit more aggressive does make sense. And then we have Jason Hodkinson with the top Chaos Legionnaire list. Here, room was made for an Ogreid Myrmidon by dropping 2 Horn Helms. I do love the Myrmidon, but I'm a little surprised the Horn Helms are dropped rather than Horn Shields. That said, it clearly worked here, and dropping enough Horn Shields for the points would mean you're probably going to be down in the body overall. Next up, we have that Iron Golems list I mentioned at the start. This list by Lars Norden Jensen has the Dominar and 6 Iron Legionary, so that's probably 2 boxes. Along with that, we have the Trueblood and the Slaughter Priest, 2 fantastic allies that we've seen a few times already. With 9 fighters in total, and 3 fantastic heroes, this looks like a lot of fun to play. The Iron Legionnaires are solid, but not fantastic damage dealers. The R is 5 toughness and 12 wounds, so pretty hard to shift for their points. Again showing the potential of the bespoke team, Jose M. Carnero brought Rotmire Creed. This has 2 Wither Lords, so it needs 2 boxes to build. The Wither Lord is an awesome hero with a triple called Lethal Ejection, where you roll dice equal to the value of the triple, and each die that is greater than the toughness of the target does 5 damage. So it's a great way to almost instantly kill low toughness fighters. There's also a net ability with the Hook Net, although it does require 3+ to land. In 10th place we have Niall Denny with Bloodbound. This is 3 Blood Warriors and 3 Blood Reavers to provide bodies. Then the Slaughter Priest and the Centaurian Marshal to provide the real punch to the list. That's still 8 bodies though. We know the Slaughter Priest has his Harpoon, and Centaurian Marshal does have a net ability, although a lot of the time he's just going to be dishing out damage. Then we have Baptiste de Boot's Slaves to Darkness Warband. This list is obviously favoured by Chaos, with 2 Chaos Chosen, a Chaos Lord, and an Aspiring Champion. Along with that we have 3 Chaos Warriors with shields. So nothing fancy here, the doubles will go on Universals, while the triples will be there for the Champion of Darkness ability. Give the heroes a bonus move and a bonus attack. With the lowest toughness of 5 and the lowest wounds of 15, these Warriors of Chaos are going to be able to hold the line. Last in the Chaos Warbands, we have the undefeated Alan Bevan, bringing a classic list. It's Chimera, 5 Plague Bearers, and Sloppy Bilepiper to move them along. Monsters obviously were a menace at the start of this new edition, and they received a pretty nasty kick, with the FAQ significantly upping their points. Even then, the Chimera has been very successful, with Salty Sea mentioning that Chimera lists have had 16 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses across some of the bigger tournaments. When it comes to monsters, it is still the most efficient damage per points, and as it can fly, it avoids many of the terrain issues a large base fighter would otherwise have. Next we have a few destruction lists. There are 8 in total, 3 Gloomspite kits, 2 Ironjaws, and 1 each of Savage Orcs, Ogre Moth Tribes, and Cruel Boys. Our first list is by Saul Painter and has 7 fighters in total, 2 wizards and a bunch of boys. The War Chanter has a double to add 1 dice to nearby fighters, while the Weird Knob has Foot of Gork, a triple that can do a chunk of damage up to 12 inches. More importantly, both can use the War triple, which will help boost the movement, as this is a pretty slow list otherwise. For this tournament, I suspect the Brute triple Umessen might have been key, as it stops characters with 14 wounds or less from contesting objectives. Next we have Layla Craven playing Gloomspite kits. That's 6 hoppers, 2 nets, 3 stabas, and a Brugate. Perfection itself. The Brugate is from the Gobapalooza list and can add 3 dice to a friendly as a double, which is kind of bonkers. Matthew Garside also took advantage of the Gobapalooza with a Scaremonger in his Bone Splitters list. Rather than scaring the enemy, the Scaremonger is for scaring your own fighters, giving them a +3 movement for a round as a triple. While most of this list is just about crumping, there are some interesting moving parts. The Bone Totem Bearer has a double to increase nearby friendlies' toughness. The Prophet has a triple that reduces nearby enemies' attack dice by 1. And the War Dog has a triple that heals all nearby friendlies. So this could potentially be a hard team to break, assuming everything lines up. John Gatehouse went for Gits with a similar but different approach. We still have lots of Squig Riders, but this time the leader is a Loon Boss. Less Stickas and more Shooters. Also the inclusion of a Fanatic, which I always love to see. The Madcap Destruction ability can be pretty random, but 50% of the time, it works every time. Next up, we have Vico Rossetti with a Ogre Moth Tribes list. I like this one a lot. 3 absolute units. Ogres who are impossible to kill and hit like a ton of bricks. Backing them up, there are 5 Noblars, so even with a chunky 765 points spent on Ogres, there are still 8 bodies in total. No doubt they went butchering their way through enemy lists, but with so many objective missions and Nobblers that fall over at a stern glance, winning games could have been tricky. Here we have an interesting one. This Cruel Boys list by Kirill Lapshin has a dumb mistake. And when I say dumb, I mean GW or dumb. Despite being a boss, the Hobgrot boss does not have the hero rune mark. That's actually the champion rune mark. It's not a big deal, you just drop the Hobgrot boss and a Hobgrot and replace with a Gut Ripper boss with a stick instead. You're down a body, but you're still keeping things cheap so you can afford your monster, the Dankhold Troggoth. The War Chanter here is a nice cheap option, giving a movement boost Wa. But I'd be tempted to get even more Slida in, as I really like the range damage profile they have. Back to Gloomspite Gits, and we have Liam McBurney and his Squigs for Scotland. With only 6 fighters in total, this is concentrated bitey. The only accommodation is for a Netta and a Poking Spear. With 4 move 8+ Squig Riders, any problem on the battlefield is bound to be eaten pretty quickly. And last for the destruction list, we have Adam Williams with Ironjaws. The Megaboss is one of the big hitters in the game, and the other Orc brutes really aren't that too far behind. This list is slow though, so it is going to be relying on those Wa triples to get the movement boost it needs to get a position. It's got decent numbers at 8 though, and once they connect, those Orcs will do some damage. Alright, over to the Death faction. This is a small one with only a few warbands. The only ones that didn't make an appearance were the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. The big warband, unsurprisingly, was the Soulblight Gravelords, which had 5 in total. There were then 2 of each of the Flesh Eater Court and the Ascorgan Trueblades, with just 1 Night Haunt in attendance. That hero was Faye Palmer. Night Haunts are an interesting faction, cursed with fly and high speed built in, so that means even their cheapest fighters, the Chain Rasps, are 85 points, and often their damage is tuned down to account. I'm a little surprised we don't see the Dreadblade Harrows here, which are one of the more popular options for an ally for other warbands, but they are quite expensive compared to the other options. The Harrodan does have the net ability and is the cheapest option you can get for that. In this list, the Knight of Shrouds is your big damage dealer, and also has the option to bring back any dead fighters back with a triple. Despite being stabbed repeatedly while assembling them, I did quite like the Spirit Hosts. I'm not sure if their triple that turns their hits into crits is statistically great, but it certainly feels good. Next up, we have Matthew Carter with Flesh Eater Courts. This is an Aberrant Archregent, a Crypt Infernal, Crypt Horror, and 6 Ghouls. So the Ghouls provide the numbers and are fast at move 5, and then the other 3 focus on dictating the killing. The Infernal in particular is fast and can fly, and once it finds its target is well capable of ripping most targets apart. The Archregent and the Infernal both have access to the Bringer of Death ability, which will give nearby fighters a movement boost, which is great. The Crypt Horror does not have the hero rune mark, that's the champion one. This gives it access to the Chosen of the King double, which will give it an extra 2 dice on attacks for the remainder of the turn, but only if within 6 inches of the Archregent. Arno Troiano has gone for similar. In this case, it's 1 less ghoul, and the Horror has been upgraded to a Haunter. I quite like Arno's decision to keep the Archregent and the Haunter in the Dagger battle group, keeping them close, making it easier for the Haunter to use the ability. A very recent addition, we have the Eskurgan Trueblades run by Eloy Garrido. This does appear to be a straight single box, so again, a 2 wins and 2 losses result is looking pretty good. Not much to say on the list. I do have a review of all the fighters in the video looking at the box. Stevie Harrison ran a similar list, but grouped across the 3 battle groups a little differently. In both cases, the Exemplar is in the Shields, which in the earlier edition would have been the main battle group, but unfortunately was only one of the 4 for this. Okay, we have 5 lists left, and they're all Soulblight Gravelords, and all in the top 16 with at least 3 wins each. I said earlier not to draw too many conclusions from a single event, but if anything, this is the talking point. In the first list, by Karl Frankel Rieta, we have a total of 9 miniatures. Interestingly enough, 5 are from the Sons of Velmorn Underworld Warband. The remaining 4 are 2 Chief Skeletons, a Vampire Lord, and a Vargeist. A lot of targets for Resurrection, and the Vampire Lord and the Vargeist are both flyers who can do a lot of damage. Next we have Espen Hoden, who has a wonderful list, mashing together 2 Underworld lists. This is the Crimson Court and the Sepulchral card, minus that leader. As the skeletons lack the minion rune mark, they cannot be resurrected, which I think makes them a little weak, but obviously they got the job done here. I do quite like the combination of Vampire and Cheap Undead, as the Terrifying rune mark allows vampires to use Call of the Crimson Feast, which adds 1 dice to nearby fighters, which the horde of undead can then take advantage of. Daniel Victor Legio has a more traditional list, so it's a White King and Necromancer for the leaders, and then just lots of skeletons and Graveguard. A total of 14 fighters overall, which is absolutely crazy. They are going to be slow, but they're going to be everywhere, and that's exactly what you wanted for this particular event. In 5th place, Demetrius Natagas has just Prince Duval and Ennius from the Crimson Court, along with a Vargskir from Curse City, a Necromancer, and a bunch of skeletons. In total, 12 fighters. I think Prince Duval is a great alternative to Vampire Lord. You lose Fly, but it is 20 points cheaper. That leaves the flying around with Ennius, while Duval focuses on killing things. In 1st place, and undefeated, we have Michael Appleton, who went for an interesting mix. The leader is the Vargoyle, a chunky flyer. Then the Archregent from the Flesh Eater Courts is an ally. The Archregent brings a triple Bringer of Death, which increases movement of nearby fighters. He also has a quad similar to the Vampire ability, but I think the quads are normally just better used for Rampage. In the last 3 lists, we've seen the Graveguard with White Blades make an appearance. These math out as one of the most efficient damage per point fighters in the game, so it's not really surprising to see them up there. Alright, what conclusions can we take out of all these lists? Well, first, these lists all look like they're a lot of fun, and there's a ton of variety across it, so I think it's a great thing for the game. The main goal always should be to have a good time. Now, after the 4 games, we've got something of an order for these lists. So you could argue that top lists are better than the bottom ones. Obviously, that's simplifying a lot of things. But if you're playing a top list and your buddy is playing a bottom list, then maybe consider adjusting things to get a fair game. One of the things you might have noticed as we went along is that the lower lists typically were just a single box with no changes. If you're looking to make a really competitive list, you probably should be looking at 3 heroes and cherry picking your fighters rather than just accepting what's there. I was delighted to see some of the other world's fighters. I think it's a really good sign. We're due to see Crimson Court vs Xandar's Truthseekers as a Warcry starter release, and both of those warbands featured heavily in this event, so that sounds like it'll really be a great entry to the game. We had just 1 Chimera at this event, but it won all of its games, so it's still as dangerous as ever. We also saw a lot of Soulblight Gravelord warbands do extremely well. That might be down to the mission, as they are able to field out lots of skeletons, but they are kind of accepted to be quite strong. I'm also going to be a little cheeky and suggest that these lists really aren't pushing the envelope. I think you can cram a good amount of extra cheese in if you really want to. I say that fully knowing that even if I had the best list possible, I'm sure I'd crash and burn on one of these events. There's a lot more to this game than just lists. I do think we are in a pretty good place for Warcry at the moment. We're starting to see a few things work better than others, but we're not down to a handful of fixed lists dominating everything. There's still a lot of room for innovation. I do think tournament organizers should look long and hard at the missions they use, as it does have an impact on which lists are successful. I've talked about this in previous videos, but I'd love to see full missions revealed for players ahead of time so we can tailor our lists and groups to them. That'll avoid a situation where one battle group randomly is better than the others, or where, like today, they have 4 objective missions. I hope you enjoyed this. I've had a lot of fun going through all this myself. I don't think it's necessarily reflective of the overall metagame, but it's a pretty good slice. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible 2-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.